Hello, Professor Rigsby. Good morning or good afternoon or good night whenever you're reading this or watching this. Um, this is my second video recording of my reading. For the reading, I have chosen Daisy Miller, specifically the section when there's a description of Winterburn, because I thought he was a very interesting character and that he was an American, but he was more well-versed in the European culture. If you haven't noticed, I'm outside. It's a bit difficult finding a place that's quiet, so I hope you can hear me. If anyone walks by and I have to talk to them and let them know why I'm talking to myself, I do apologize. But without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get started, then I'll explain further why I think this is a really interesting passage and why you should give me an A for reading it to you. Okay. "He's an American," cried Randolph in his little hard voice. The young lady gave no heed to the announcement, but looked straight at her brother. "Well, I guess you'd better be quiet," she simply observed. It seemed to Winterburn that he had been in a manner presented. He got up and stepped slowly towards the young girl, throwing away his cigarette. "This little boy and I have made acquaintance," he said, with great civility. In Geneva, as he had been perfectly aware, a young man was not at liberty to speak to young unmarried lady except under certain rarely occurring conditions. But here at Vevey, I'm not sure I pronounced that right, what conditions could be better than these? A pretty American girl coming and standing in front of you in a garden. This pretty American girl, however, on hearing Winterburn's observation, simply glanced at him. She then turned her head and looked over the parapet at the lake and the opposite mountains. He wondered whether he had gone too far, but he had decided that he must advance farther rather than retreat. While he was thinking of something else to say, the young lady turned to the little boy again. "I should like to know where you got that pole," she said. "I bought it," responded Randolph. "You don't mean to say you're going to take it to Italy?" "Yes, I'm going to take it to Italy," the child declared. The young girl glanced over at the front of her dress and smoothed out a knot of ribbon. Then she rested her eyes upon the prospect again. "Well, I guess you'd better leave it somewhere," she said after a moment. "Are you going to Italy?" Winterburn inquired, in a tone of great respect. So I probably read that wrong. The young lady glanced at him again. "Yes, sir," she replied, and said nothing more. "Are you going over the Simplon?" Winterburn paused, a little embarrassed. "I don't know," she said. "I suppose it's some mountain, Randolph. What mountain are we going over?" "Going where?" the child demanded. "To Italy," Winterburn explained. "I don't know," said Randolph. "I don't want to go to Italy. I want to go to America." "Oh, Italy is a beautiful place," rejoined the young man. "Can you get candy there?" Randolph loudly inquired. "I hope not," said his sister. "I guess you have had enough candy, and Mother thinks so too." "I haven't had any for ever so long. For 100 weeks, cried the boy, still jumping about. The young lady inspected her flounces and smothered her ribbons again, and Winterbourne presently risked an observation upon the beauty of the view. He was ceasing to be embarrassed, for he had begun to perceive that she was not in the least embarrassed herself. There had not been the slightest alteration in her charming complexion. There was evidently neither offended nor fluttered. She was evidently neither offended nor fluttered. If she looked another way when he spoke to her, and seemed not particularly to hear him, this was simply her habit, her manner, yet as he talked a little more, and pointed out some of the objects of interest in the view, with which she appeared quite unacquainted, she gradually gave him more of the benefit of her glance, and then he saw that this glance was perfectly direct and unshrinking. It was not, however, what would have been called an immodest glance, for the young girl's eyes were singularly honest and fresh. They were wonderfully pretty eyes, and indeed Winterburn had not seen for a long time anything prettier than his fair countrywoman's various features, her complexion, her nose, her ears, her teeth. He had a great relish for feminine beauty. He was addicted to observing and analyzing it, and as regards this young lady's face, he made several observations. It was not at all insipid, but it was not exactly expressive. And though it was eminently delicate, Winterburn mentally accused it, very forgivingly, of a want of finish. He thought of it possibly that Master Randolph's sister was a coquette. He was sure she had a spirit of her own, but in her bright, sweet, superficial little visage there was no mockery, no irony. Before long it became obvious that she was much disposed towards conversation. She told him that they were going to Rome for the winter. She and her mother and Randolph, she asked him if he was a real, she and her mother and Randolph. She asked him if he was a real American. She couldn't have taken him for one. He seemed more like a German. This was said after a little hesitation, especially when he spoke. Winterbourne, laughing, answered that he had met Germans who spoke like Americans, but that he had not, so far as remembered, met an American who spoke like a German. Sorry, getting a little tongue-tied here. Then he asked her if she should not be more comfortable in sitting upon the bench which he had just quitted. She answered that she liked standing up and walking about, but she presently sat down. She told him that she was from New York State, if you know where that is. Winterbourne learned more about her by catching hold of her small, slippery brother and making him stand a few minutes by his side. "Tell me your name, boy," he said. "Randolph C. Miller," said the boy, sharply, "and I'll tell you her name." And he leveled his alpenstock at his sister. "You had better wait till you are asked," said the young lady calmly. "I should like very much to know your name," said Winterbourne. "Her name is Daisy Miller," cried the child, "but that isn't her real name. That isn't her name on her cards." "It's a pity you haven't got one of my cards," said Miss Miller. "Her real name is Annie P. Miller," the boy went on. "Ask him his name," said his sister, indicating Winterbourne. But on that point, Randolph seemed perfectly indifferent. He continued to supply information in regard to his own family. "My father's name is Ezra B. Miller," he announced. "My father ain't in Europe. My father's in a better place than Europe." Winterbourne imagined for a moment that this was the manner in which the child had been taught to intimate that Mr. Miller had been removed to the sphere of celestial rewards. What's up, dude? Sorry, just making a recording. But Randolph immediately added, "My father's in Schenectady. He's got a big business. My father's rich, you bet." "Well," ejaculated Miss Miller, lowering her parasol and looking at the embroidered border. Winterbourne presently released the child, who departed, dragging his alpenstock along the path. "He doesn't like Europe," said the young girl. "He wants to go back." "To Schenectady, you mean?" "Yes, he wants to go right home. He hasn't got any boys here. There's one boy here, but he always goes around with a teacher. They won't let him play." "And your brother hasn't any teacher?" Winterbourne inquired. "Mother thought of getting him onto one to travel around with us. There was a lady told her a very good teacher, an American lady. Perhaps you know her. Miss Sanders, I think she came from Boston. She told her of this teacher, and we thought of getting him to travel around with us. But Randolph said he didn't want a teacher traveling around with us. He said he wouldn't have lessons when he was in the cars, and we are in the cars half the time. There was an English lady we met in the cars. I think her name was Miss Featherstone. Perhaps you know her. She wanted to know why I didn't give Randolph lessons. Give him instructions, she called it. I guess he could give me more instructions than I could give him. He's very smart." "Yes," said Winterbourne. "He seems very smart. Mother's going to get a teacher for him as soon as we get to Italy." "Can you get good teachers in Italy?" "Very good, I should think," said Winterbourne. "Or else he's going to find some school. He ought to learn some more. He's only 9. He's going to college," and in this way Miss Miller continued to converse upon the affairs of her family and upon other topics. She sat there with her extremely pretty hands, ornamented with very brilliant rings, folded in her lap, and with her pretty eyes now resting upon those of Winterbourne. Now wandering over the garden, the people who passed by, and the beautiful view, she talked to Winterbourne as if she had known him a long time. He found it very pleasant. It was many years since he had heard a young girl talk so much. It might have been said of this unknown young lady who had come and sat down beside him upon a bench that she chattered. She was very quiet. She sat in a charming, tranquil attitude, but her lips and her eyes were constantly moving. She had a soft, slender, agreeable voice, and her tone was decidedly sociable. She gave Winterbourne a history of her movements and intentions, and those of her mother and brother in Europe, and in particular the various hotels in which they had stopped. That English lady in the car, she said, Miss Featherstone, asked me if she didn't all live in hotels in America. I told her I had never been in so many hotels in my life, as since I came to Europe, I have never seen so many to Europe. Oh. It's nothing but hotels. But Miss Miller did not make this remark with the Cronus accent. She appeared to be in the best humor with everything. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and end up the reading right there. Talked for about 10 minutes. A little bit of stuttering. I do apologize for that. I also had a few people walk by, so I got a little confused. So I chose this reading because it was the first true introduction between Winterbourne and the Miller family. And it was interesting to see the fact that though he was an American, he relied a lot on his European sensibilities while talking with them. But at the same time, he did let a bit of his American cultural styling slip through. Like the point where he noticed that he was talking too much, and that he had overstepped his boundaries and been too forward with Daisy. But at the same time, he then sat back and said, well, I might as well keep going because, sorry, I put my hand right in front. I might as well keep going because I've already gone this far. It's really interesting to see this kind of culture clash within him, because the whole book focuses on the culture clash between Daisy and Daisy's American side and the European cultural sides of all Europe, especially the British and the Rome and everything everywhere she goes. So it's really interesting to see that now this conflict has been internalized inside Winterbourne, especially because Winterbourne is supposed to be this, was reviewed as back then as the hero of the novel, the person who knows how to act in this culture, the person who displays, as Homi Bhabha would put it, because he focuses on an Orientalism, specifically post-colonialism, he put it as hybridity. Winterbourne displays a hybridity, which is a melding of two cultures. He successfully assimilates himself to both of them. He uses specifically mimicry, which is basically just working in ways that fit in and displaying characteristics of a culture while in that culture. It is assumed that when he's in America, he will act like an American, and when he is in Europe, he acts like a European. This is mimicry. He is mimicking the things he needs to be seen as that type of person, so he can be played off as them. Kind of like the sense of what is brought up when she talks about the Germans that speak like Americans, and he says, I have met Germans that speak like Americans. It's, again, presenting the idea that they know how to sound to fit in, to not be a distinctly other type of person. The otherness is a term brought together by Bhabha, and again, it's all out of the Orientalist view, which is kind of the Western's view of the East. And I know Europe is still a Western idea, but it's just the idea that this is the way to act, and if you don't act that way, you are wrong. So Winterbourne knows this. Daisy does not know this, and she doesn't ever really learn this, hence why she engages in actions like going with the other guy she ends up falling in love with. She goes with him to kind of a seedy place, a place where, to be there is kind of suggestive of your personality, and that's why in criticisms of the book, a lot of Americans, especially the Americans, didn't like her character. European criticisms, they thought she was a bit ridiculous, but they accepted the fact that she's from a different culture, but Americans were like, nah, you showed us in a completely poor light, which is interesting in its own right, the fact that Americans, as brave and independent as much as they like to claim I'm an American, whenever it comes to a cultural meeting of the two cultures, they always want the person in question to hide their American side because they feel it's uncultured. In comparison, they lack the manners and the distinctions of respect that